Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Jeff, for mostly stealing most of my thunder. Because a lot of the insights I think that Jeff mentioned are exactly bang on, and I'm probably going to just reinforce those messages. But then at the end, I am going to provide a lens which is different from both Chukong and from iDreamSky, which is what is the lens when you are approaching a large ad network, and what does all of this chaos kind of mean when you're working with ad networks. So briefly going to touch upon the overall market. Again, Jeff covered a bunch of these insights, touching upon acquisition, retention, and monetization insights, which are largely kind of somewhat counterintuitive insights about going into China, and then a summary in terms of the ad network strategy. Not going to cover this slide because it's just the scale of the market, but this is the same point that Jeff mentioned. I think you cannot ignore tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities in China. That is where a lot of the people with the appetite for spending the time and the money and the energy on the top games lies, and you have to kind of very consciously build a strategy that accounts for getting your game into all of these cities as well. RPG and card battle games, like, huge in China. So this is a comparison of the prevalence of RPG and card battle games between the US and China. And clearly, I think if you have a good, solid RPG game or a card battle game, I think you should think about China. The market extremely fragmented on all three dimensions: distribution, payments, and discovery. I think this is a comparison of the level of stratification you have not only on the app stores but also across payments and discovery channels in the West, and the level of fragmentation that you have on all three dimensions in China. I mean, essentially for every service that you have in the US that is kind of de facto, there will be 5 or 7 de facto services, which are all pretty big and pretty large, and it's a choice you need to make on how you kind of get access to as many of these as possible. On the acquisition side, I think, like Jeff mentioned, I think size matters because of bandwidth issues. Make sure your game is of the right size. Otherwise, a lot of people are just going to drop off because they're not going to be able to download games that are huge from a bandwidth perspective. App Store promotions, extremely important. I think I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that if you want your game to be successful, the likes of 360, Vanduja, 91, etc., extremely important to be on your overall strategy. And even there, just getting on those app stores is not enough. So if you've done all the hard work, if you've kind of done all the billing SDKs, integration, everything else, and then you just end up being there but not being featured or promoted, it doesn't really work that way. Game centers within social apps like that of WeChat, I think given what we've seen on what happened in the game centers of Line and Kakao, it's absolutely no questions that this is going to be the next big thing besides the app stores, and it already is pretty big. Again, like Jeff mentioned, so piracy, regardless of whether you want to go into China or not, if you're on Android, you are already in China, so you might as well take it by the horns and address this. And exactly like Jeff mentioned, I think once you choose to go into China in a sort of proper official manner, then it actually counters your pirated sort of content significantly. On the retention side, I think clearly localization is really important. One of the sort of minor points about localization is just the number of different types of themes you want to think about that are more Chinese is extremely important. You want to sort of not just have a few standard themes, like more customization. Like, people love customizing. This is a kind of a trend not only in China but across Asia, where having themes that you can customize for yourself instead of having a few standard instances of the game is again huge. Another example of kind of how different themes that are more locally specific, sort of tailored, are extremely useful. Perspectives and color schemes. So generally, lighter color schemes, more sort of 2D-ish perspectives are a little more popular. So Guns Dash more popular than Temple Run. I think some of the elements are the fact that it is 2D. It is kind of a far more simpler control set game, and those generally tend to have worked better, especially on the more endless runner side. Again, cartoons more than human characters. So understand the sort of the kind of characters and cartoons that people like. Gameplay complexity, I think in general, people, even if the overall sort of puzzle is of the same complexity, but the look and feel and the elements need to come across somewhat more simply, especially in puzzle games, than kind of the complexity that is generally acceptable in the West. People don't care about personal milestones as much as they do in the West. So like all of these, you're on this point in the map is not very meaningful. Leaderboards and sort of comparing yourself and where you are against your friends is far more powerful, and that's what you should go after. Stars, objectives, progression maps. Like people don't care as much in China as they do about leaderboards. Simpler game controls. So while Temple Run has kind of 4 or 5 different controls all the way from tilts and shifts, like Guns Dash is very simple, just your basic slide and jump. Give people sort of more daily gratifications. So I think daily bonuses, daily sort of login rewards, etc. work reasonably well, and the more you can do kind of these daily bonuses, they work really well. On the monetization side, I think while in the West kind of you have a lot of attempts, people in China try to reduce the number of attempts that you have in total, and then incentivize you to buy more, and people do end up paying much more than they do in the West for those kind of upgrades. Your app store, your kind of in-store purchase has to be far more sort of simpler and single page, and in general, the look and feel, right, I'm just kind of pointing it out, the look and feel of the store, the look and feel of your experience in the store is very different from how it looks like. So again, a little bit more cartoonish, a little bit more kind of lighter colors, more sort of block templates of how you buy stuff. Yeah, I mean, again, just very basic things about tabs and currency. So while I'm highlighting these, I think this is clearly more indicative than stereotyping the entire genre. But I think you need to be very deep and detailed in those differentiations. So I think localization is far more than even the characters and the sort of language. It's more about how people perceive. Like Jeff mentioned, in many cases on Chinese websites, there's far more denser content in place. The same kind of analogy holds true even in games, where there are certain cultural aspects of how they like things laid out, and it probably stems from the sort of deep culture of calligraphy and just in general how they parse and read things. And you need to be very careful in how you sort of present and make sure that they're parsing your content and your objects very cleanly. Clearly, IAP and the sort of ticket size is extremely important. So I think while Jeff mentioned the aspect of the 1 RMB and not the impulse buy, I think even the currency, sort of, you want to sort of reduce the actual price that they're paying per unit that they're buying. So I think that kind of is a broad sense on various things that tend to work, and touching upon various aspects of monetization, retention, and acquisition. But I think from an ad network perspective, I think it's extremely interesting to watch, because clearly not any of this is what a traditional ad network does, right? So if you are planning on doing an acquisition strategy that cuts across various publishers and general ad networks and getting access to all kinds of other users, and you have kind of these other strategies around app stores, how should it all fit together? Like, are they two completely different parallel strategies? And I mean, in my view, the fundamental thing that joins them is that it's not even meaningful to go to an ad network if they're not getting you like really, really large scale. So if you're a pretty sort of decent game in the West and you're looking for tens of millions of downloads, like that's when it makes sense to even think about sort of augmenting in addition to the standard app store strategy. So if an ad network is not giving you much more scale than what you can ordinarily get from the app stores, then it's not even worth sort of talking to them. And my sense is that app stores that or ad networks which will blur the lines between publishers and distribution channels will be the ones that will ultimately be successful, right? So you need to make sure that ultimately the value that the ad networks will bring is a very deep level of user segmentation, and that user segmentation must apply not only on users that you're getting from sort of classical ad placements that ad networks do, but also user segmentation that you get from these app stores. Like imagine an app store that gets you to access to 200 million users and shows the same promoted sort of app across all of those 200 million users. Like that certainly seems that there is an opportunity there for ad networks to come in there with deeper segmentation of those users, understanding which kinds of users like which kinds of games, and that's where the true value of ad networks will evolve this year and hopefully next year, where I think across users from app stores, across users in the distribution network of the ad networks, like segmentation that makes sense and segmentation that ultimately helps the game become sort of more targeted and more deeply entrenched in a higher LTV audience is what's going to make it more successful. Thanks. Thank you.